Have you ever walked away from a conversation feeling twisted up inside, like somehow you were the problem, even though deep down you knew you weren't? That confusion isn't an accident, it's a game. And the person across from you, the narcissist, was holding the controller. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to end up feeling guilty around certain people, even when you've done nothing wrong? Maybe you stood your ground. If you said no, you spoke your truth, and somehow, instead of feeling strong, you walked away heavy. That's not random. That's not you being overly sensitive. That's a tactic. That's a mind game. Narcissists are masters at turning responsibility inside out. They don't just avoid blame, they assign it to the very people who care the most. And the more empathy you have, the more compassion you show, if the more vulnerable you are to this game, because guilt hooks onto your sense of responsibility, your desire to be fair, your heart for others. They know that if, and they use it. Let me give you a daily life picture. Imagine you're at work, a colleague misses a deadline, but instead of owning it, if they come to you with that disappointed tone, well, I couldn't finish because you didn't get me the numbers fast enough. Suddenly, if you're scrambling in your mind, replaying every step, wondering if maybe you did drop the ball, you start apologizing, even though the truth is you did your part, but now the spotlight has shifted. You're the one in the hot seat. Or think about this in a relationship. You finally say, I need some time for myself tonight. I'm feeling drained. And what do you hear back? Wow, I guess I don't matter to you anymore. I thought we were a team. Do you hear what just happened? Your healthy boundary got twisted into an accusation. If what should have been a moment of self-care turned into a courtroom drama where you're suddenly the defendant on trial. That's how the guilt game works. If it plants doubt where there should be confidence, it creates shame where there should be strength. And slowly, if you're not careful, if you find yourself living reactively, always checking and rechecking, am I being selfish? Am I not giving enough? Am I the problem here? Here's the truth. Guilt is supposed to be like a compass. It's there to nudge us when we've genuinely done wrong. If I break a promise, if I lie, if I hurt someone with intention, then guilt has a role. It points me back toward integrity. But what the narcissist does is hijack that compass and spin the needle. Suddenly north feels like south, up feels like down. And you're lost in a fog of, I must have done something wrong, when in fact you haven't. The real damage isn't just the guilt itself, it's the way it makes you shrink. Because when you're constantly feeling guilty, if you start to silence your own needs, you stop setting boundaries, you bend, you overgive, you apologize for things you never should apologize for. If you live in this emotional crouch, always ducking, always adjusting, hoping that maybe if you try hard enough, the guilt will finally go away. But here's the secret guilt that's assigned to you. Instead of earned by you, never disappears. It just grows heavier. The only way to break the cycle is to recognize when the guilt doesn't belong to you in the first place. So what does that look like in real life? It looks like pausing when someone lays an accusation at your feet and asking yourself, is this really mine? Or is it being handed to me like a bag I don't have to carry? It looks like resisting the reflex to instantly apologize and instead taking a breath. Replaying the facts and checking your own heart. If your conscience is clear, then the guilt is false. Picture yourself walking through an airport. If someone might try to hand you a heavy suitcase insisting, this is yours, carry it. But if you know it's not yours, what do? If you put your hands up and say, no, that doesn't belong to me. That's the same posture you need emotionally. You don't take on every suitcase of blame that someone shoves your way. And here's the empowering part. Once you stop picking up that guilt, if something shifts inside you, you stand taller, you breathe easier. You remember that you are allowed to say no, you are allowed to rest. You are allowed to take up space in this world without apologizing for existing. People who thrive despite narcissists aren't the ones who fight every accusation. They're the ones who learn the art of selective acceptance. They only accept guilt when it's legitimate, everything else, it gets set down, it gets left behind. I want you to think of one moment recently where you felt guilty, but deep down you knew you were only doing what was right for you. Maybe you declined an invitation because you needed rest. Maybe you told a friend you couldn't help with something because your own plate was already full. Maybe you didn't smile through a situation that made you uncomfortable, and then you felt that sting of guilt. I want you to revisit that memory if, and this time, instead of carrying that guilt like a weight, I want you to imagine handing it back. Saying to yourself, that doesn't belong to me. That's how freedom begins. If not by changing the narcissist, they may never stop playing their games, but by changing how much of the game you agree to play. If and when you no longer carry false guilt, you reclaim one of the most powerful things you can have: peace of mind. If have you ever been so certain about something you remember the words that were said, the look on someone's face, the way it all unfolded, and yet when you brought it up, they looked at you as if you were crazy. They denied it. They rewrote it. They smiled that sly smile and said, that never happened. Or worse, you're remembering wrong. That's not just a disagreement. That's not a simple mix-up. That's a strategy. If it's called gaslighting, one of the narcissist's favorite games. Gaslighting is the slow, subtle art of convincing you to distrust your own eyes, your own ears, your own memory. And it works because they don't just attack facts, they attack your sense of reality itself. And once your reality is shaky, if you can be controlled, let's paint a picture. Imagine a couple in the middle of a tense conversation. One partner says something cutting, something sharp like, you're useless, you never do anything right. The other person is hurt, quiet, maybe even holding back tears. Later, when they bring it up, what do they hear? I never said that. You're exaggerating. You're too sensitive. Think about what that does inside you. If there's the original wound, the cruel words themselves. But now there's a second wound because suddenly you're doubting yourself. Did I mishear? Did I overreact? Maybe I'm too emotional. The ground under your feet starts to shift, and before long, you stop trusting your own instincts. If gaslighting doesn't always look dramatic, sometimes it's in the little everyday things. Maybe you tell a friend, hey, I felt hurt when you canceled last minute. And they laugh and say, I told you I couldn't come. If you just weren't listening. You replay the conversation in your head, and you know that's not what was said. But the seed of doubt has been planted. Or maybe at work, a boss gives you an instruction, you follow it, and then later they claim they never said that. Now you're not only scrambling to fix the mistake, you're questioning your own memory. And here's the insidious part: the more this happens, the more you begin to censor yourself. You stop speaking up. You stop trusting your memory. You stop believing that your version of events is solid. And slowly, if the narcissist doesn't even have to convince you anymore, you start convincing yourself. But let me tell you this, your lived experience is valid. If your memory matters, your intuition deserves respect. You do not need anyone else to sign off on the reality you know to be true. Breaking free from gaslighting starts with one simple but powerful decision to anchor yourself in your own truth. To say, I know what I saw. I know what I heard. I know what I felt. You don't have to argue endlessly with the gaslighter. You don't have to convince them. They'll twist and dodge and deny until the conversation wears you out. Instead, you stand firm in your inner clarity. Let's go back to that couple example. If the gaslighted partner doesn't have to win the debate of did you or didn't you say it, they only need to trust their experience. Instead of crumbling into doubt, they can calmly say, I know what I heard and I know how it made me feel. You don't get to tell me my feelings are imaginary. That's the pivot point. Because the gaslighter's power only works when you agree to play their version of reality. The moment you say, no, I trust myself, the game starts to fall apart. Here's another way to think of it. Imagine you're holding a photograph. It's a picture of an important moment in your life, something you know happened, the gaslighter comes along and insists, that's not real. That's fake. You're imagining it, what do? Do you throw the photograph away because they denied it? Of course not. You hold it tighter. You keep it safe. If that's your proof, that's your reality in daily life, that photograph can be a journal entry, a text message, a conversation you wrote down while it was fresh in your memory. Writing things down isn't about obsession. It's about clarity. It's about reminding yourself later when the fog of doubt creeps in, no, I didn't make that up. It really happened. And my truth stands. The most inspiring thing about people who break free from gaslighting is not that they change the narcissist. It's that they change their relationship with themselves. If they build this unshakable trust with their own inner voice, they learn to say, I don't need you to agree with me for me to know what's real. And that right there, that's freedom. Because once you anchor yourself in your truth, if the gaslighter's words lose their grip, they can shout, deny, accuse, rewrite history, but it all bounces off. You walk out of the fog and suddenly the world feels clear again. You start noticing when someone is twisting reality, and instead of questioning yourself, you say, if I see the game and I don't have to play. So the next time someone looks you in the eye and tries to convince you that what you know is real isn't, if I want you to pause, take a deep breath and remind yourself, I trust my memory, I trust my instincts. If I trust my truth, that single declaration is a shield, and with it, you step out of the trap of gaslighting and back into the power of clarity.